My name is Catherine Wells, and I'm a pediatric ICU nurse with 12 years of experience protecting vulnerable children. I never imagined I'd need to protect my own daughter from the person I trusted most. This is the story of how I discovered that my husband had been systematically endangering our 7-year-old diabetic daughter's life for 18 months, while I believed he was managing her medical expenses responsibly. I checked Emma's overnight glucose reading and felt my stomach drop. 178 mean DL, dangerously high for a morning reading. Emma stirred in her bed, looking pale and exhausted. "Mom, why do I feel sick every morning now?" My nursing instincts screamed that something was wrong, but I pushed down the concern. David handled all our insurance communications. Surely he would have mentioned if there were issues with Emma's diabetes management. "Sometimes your body needs time to adjust, sweetheart. Let's get your insulin ready." As I prepared Emma's morning injection, I noticed her testing strips looked different, thicker, requiring more pressure to draw blood. Emma winced more than usual during the finger stick. "These strips hurt more than the old ones," she said, with the resignation of a child who'd known medical routines for 3 years. "Daddy says the insurance changed what they cover. These are what they approve now." David sat at the kitchen table, reviewing medical paperwork with his coffee. At 37, he projected competent organization, the kind of husband who handles complex insurance issues so his wife can focus on immediate patient care. "Emma's glucose was 178 this morning," I reported, unable to hide my concern. David looked up with that patient but exasperated expression I'd grown to dread. "Catherine, you're creating problems where none exist. Remember what Dr. Anderson said about your tendency to over-monitor?" I felt the familiar twist of uncertainty. Had Dr. Anderson said that? The 18 months since Emma's diagnosis had been a blur of learning diabetes management while David handled the overwhelming insurance complexity. "I just want to make sure we're not missing anything." "That's exactly what I'm talking about. You see medical emergencies everywhere because of your ICU experience. Emma's having normal fluctuations that don't require panic." I remembered the overwhelming chaos when 5.5-year-old Emma was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, the hospital room, the IV lines, learning about insulin ratios and carbohydrate counting. Most overwhelming were the insurance representatives explaining coverage tiers, prior authorizations, and medical supply networks. "I can't process all this financial complexity right now," I'd told David, my hands shaking as I held stacks of insurance documents. "I need to focus on learning how to keep her alive. Can you handle the money side?" "Of course," David had said, taking the papers in my hand. "That's what I'm here for. You focus on Emma's medical needs. I'll ensure the finances and insurance are handled properly." The power of attorney document had seemed logical. David worked in insurance processing. He understood the systems. I was drowning in medical protocols and terrified of making mistakes. Trusting him completely felt responsible. "Mom, can I have the beeping thing back?" Emma asked suddenly, referring to the continuous glucose monitor that had been discontinued 6 months ago. I looked at David questioningly. "The CGM would help us catch these high readings faster. Insurance stopped covering continuous monitoring," David explained with the tone of someone who'd had this conversation before. "The new policy requires proof that fingerstick testing isn't sufficient. Dr. Anderson said we could reapply in 6 months if her control doesn't improve." Something felt wrong, but I couldn't identify what. David's explanations always sounded reasonable. Backed by medical authority and insurance complexity, I didn't have time to investigate fully. "Besides," David continued, "some experts think continuous monitoring makes kids dependent. Better for Emma to learn recognizing her own symptoms." Emma looked between us. "But I liked knowing my numbers without getting poked, and sometimes I don't feel the low ones coming." My professional alarm bells rang louder. A 7-year-old type 1 diabetic not recognizing hypoglycemic episodes is dangerous. But David's reasoning echoed concepts I'd heard from some medical professionals about building patient independence. Driving to the hospital, Emma's questions replayed in my mind: the fatigue, the higher glucose readings, the supply changes David attributed to insurance modifications. In the ICU, I would never accept vague explanations for a patient's declining condition. But this wasn't just any patient. This was my daughter. And David wasn't just any insurance representative. He was my husband with power of attorney specifically for Emma's medical finances. I'd given him that authority because I trusted his expertise and needed to focus on learning medical management. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Don't forget Emma's supply order comes today. Had to switch pharmacies again. Insurance network changes. New place is cheaper anyway. Another change. Another adaptation. I realized I'd lost track of how many modifications David had made to Emma's care plan in the name of insurance compliance. When medical financial abuse involves a child with chronic conditions, the abuser exploits the caregiver's overwhelming focus on immediate medical needs. Power of attorney becomes the weapon for systematic medical neglect. The complexity of pediatric chronic disease management provides perfect cover for gradually reducing care quality while pocketing the financial difference. I trusted David to handle financial complexity because my professional competence in medical care made me assume he had equal competence in medical finances. This trust would nearly cost Emma her life. If you're managing medical expenses in your family, boundaries matter. Trust is essential, but verification is survival. Comment boundaries if you want to learn warning signs of medical financial manipulation that can endanger the patients we love most. I thought I was responsibly delegating medical financial management to my insurance expert husband. What I didn't yet know was that for 18 months, David had been systematically degrading our daughter's medical care, pocketing the difference and using Emma's medical fund to support a secret life that valued his personal needs over our child's survival. The next 8 minutes would show me discovering the pattern of medical neglect disguised as responsible financial management, a pattern that put my professional competence and maternal instincts on a collision course with the truth about the man I trusted with my daughter's life. Professional instincts don't disappear just because the patient is your own child. My ICU training had taught me to recognize patterns that others might miss. What I was about to discover would shake my faith in the man I'd trusted with Emma's life, and force me to confront the possibility that my daughter's declining health wasn't natural disease progression. During my break, I reviewed Emma's home glucose log with professional eyes. The pattern made my blood run cold. Her 3-month average had climbed from 145 mg/dL to 189 mg/dL. In pediatric diabetes, that progression suggests seriously inadequate control. I called David immediately. I'm looking at Emma's numbers. Her glucose control is getting worse, not better. Catherine, you're obsessing again, came his patient but frustrated response. Dr. Anderson said some kids go through adjustment periods. Emma's growing, her insulin needs are changing. But her A1C was 1% last month. That's concerning for a 7-year-old. It's still within acceptable range. You're micromanaging numbers instead of seeing the big picture. Emma's active, happy, growing normally. Stop creating medical emergencies. I felt that familiar cognitive dissonance. My training said worsening control required investigation, but David's explanations always referenced medical authority I couldn't easily verify. My phone rang while I was reviewing patient charts. Emma's school nurse sounded concerned. Mrs. Wells, Emma had a severe low blood sugar during recess. She didn't recognize the symptoms, and her emergency glucose tablets weren't in her backpack. My professional composure cracked. What do you mean they weren't there? I pack them every morning. Her supply bag was empty. We had to use the school's emergency supplies. Her reading was 58, quite dangerous. I arrived at school 20 minutes later to find Emma pale and confused in the nurse's office. A 7-year-old diabetic without emergency supplies is a recipe for disaster. Sweetheart, what happened to your glucose tablets? Daddy said I should save them for real emergencies. He told me to ask the nurse if I felt funny instead of using the tablets myself. Every professional instinct I had screamed in alarm. You don't ration emergency glucose tablets for a type 1 diabetic child. I called David immediately, my hand shaking with anger and fear. Emma had a severe low at school. Her emergency supplies weren't in her backpack. I told her to be more careful about using them. Those glucose tablets are expensive, $12 a tube. She was going through them too quickly. David, Emma's life is worth more than $12. See? You immediately assume worst-case scenarios. Emma was fine. The school handled it. She learned to ask for help instead of relying on expensive supplies she doesn't really need. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Was I overreacting? David understood medical costs. Maybe I was being overprotective. But the numbers didn't lie. Emma's control was deteriorating. I sat across from Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric endocrinologist and longtime colleague, desperately needing professional perspective. Sarah, can I ask about pediatric diabetes coverage? My daughter Emma's glucose control has been declining. My husband says it's due to insurance changes. Generic insulin, basic testing strips, no continuous monitoring. Dr. Chen's expression grew concerned. Catherine, most insurance companies have excellent pediatric diabetes coverage. It's preventive care. They know good control prevents expensive complications. What's your insurance? Meridian Health Plus. They're actually one of the better ones for pediatric diabetes. They typically cover continuous monitoring for kids under 10 and high-quality supplies. What reason did they give for denying coverage? I felt the world shift slightly. My husband handles all insurance communication. He works for Meridian in claims processing. Dr. Chen paused almost imperceptibly. Catherine, someone who works for an insurance company would know that pediatric diabetes has different coverage rules. The liability concerns about denying medically necessary care to children are significant. Driving home, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to call Meridian Health Plus directly. Not through David, not with his explanations, but as Emma's mother seeking direct verification of her coverage. I pulled over and dialed the customer service number on Emma's insurance card. Meridian Health Plus. How can I help you? I need to verify coverage for my daughter's type 1 diabetes, specifically continuous glucose monitoring and premium insulin. After verifying my identity, the representative's response stopped my world. Emma is covered under our pediatric chronic condition plan. Continuous glucose monitoring is fully covered for patients under 18 with type 1 diabetes. Premium insulin requires prior authorization, but is typically approved. My hands started shaking. Can you repeat that? Continuous monitoring is covered? Yes, ma'am. It's been a covered benefit since 2019. Would you like me to check for any claims? Please. The pause felt eternal. I don't see any claims for continuous monitoring in the past 18 months. The last claims were for basic testing strips and generic insulin. Everything David had told me about insurance limitations was a lie. Medical financial abusers exploit medical complexity because victims are too overwhelmed to verify every transaction. When one person controls all medical finances, warning signs become invisible until the patient's health is significantly compromised. The complexity of chronic disease management becomes perfect cover for systematic endangerment. My professional competence in medical care made me trust completely in David's financial management expertise. This division of labor gave David complete control over Emma's medical resources, while I focused on day-to-day care, never realizing that declining care quality wasn't due to insurance limitations. Have you ever felt shut out of your own family's medical finances? When medical complexity hides financial manipulation, the patient's health suffers, while families blame insurance changes. Boundaries Community, share your experiences with medical financial transparency. Ma'am, would you like me to check the reimbursement history? The representative asked. Yes, please. I see regular reimbursements for premium supplies, continuous monitoring, and name-brand insulin totaling $847 per month. These have been processed consistently for 18 months. $847 monthly for 18 months. Over $15,000 in medical reimbursements that should have provided Emma with premium diabetes care. But Emma had been getting progressively worse care while David claimed insurance wouldn't cover better options. Where are these reimbursements sent? To the bank account designated by the authorized representative. I listened as she read an account number I didn't recognize. Not our joint account, not our medical savings. A completely different account David controlled. I hung up and sat in my car, staring at the evidence I'd written down. 18 months of reimbursements for premium care Emma never received. $847 monthly diverted to an account I'd never seen. Everything David told me about insurance limitations was false. My daughter's declining health wasn't natural disease progression. It was systematic medical neglect disguised as responsible financial management. And the person I'd trusted most had been stealing from our child's medical care for over a year. The next 8 minutes would reveal the full scope of David's betrayal and my horrifying realization that Emma's life had been endangered while I believed completely in my husband's insurance expertise. The phone call with Meridian Health Plus had shattered my understanding of Emma's medical care. Everything David told me about insurance limitations was false. But I was about to discover something far worse. The systematic medical endangerment of my daughter wasn't accidental oversight. It was calculated financial abuse that put a 7-year-old's life at risk for personal gain. I called Linda Morrison, our hospital's insurance liaison, needing professional guidance to understand what I'd discovered. Linda, I have a question about medical reimbursements. If insurance approves premium supplies for a pediatric diabetic, but the family receives generic supplies instead, where does the money go? Catherine, that would be insurance fraud. The reimbursement is specifically for approved medical supplies. Using cheaper alternatives while keeping the difference is a federal crime, especially involving child medical care. My professional composure finally cracked. Linda, I think my husband has been committing medical insurance fraud with my daughter's diabetes care. You need to document everything immediately and contact law enforcement. This isn't just financial fraud, it's child endangerment through medical neglect. After David left for his weekly work meeting, I broke into his home office. My hands shook as I searched through files looking for evidence of Emma's medical expenses. In the bottom drawer, I found a folder labeled E-Medical. The documents inside told a horrifying story. Insurance pre-authorizations for continuous glucose monitoring, approved 18 months ago. Invoices for premium insulin, fully covered by insurance. Reimbursement checks made out to David Wells for the full amount of premium care. Receipts for generic supplies costing 60% less than insurance reimbursed. But there was more. Bank statements for an account I'd never seen, containing $12,847. Money skimmed from Emma's medical care over 18 months. At the bottom, I found a second set of statements. Monthly transfers of $800 from the medical account to another account labeled personal expenses. I sat beside Emma's bed, watching my daughter sleep with this new, horrible knowledge. With professional eyes, I could now see what I should have caught months ago. Emma's subtle pallor suggesting chronic poor glucose control. Her decreased growth velocity, a sign of inadequate diabetes management. The dark circles under her eyes weren't just tiredness. They were from chronic hyperglycemia. I checked her glucose meter's stored readings. The pattern was devastating. Averages of 170-190 module L, well above the target range of 80-120 for pediatric patients. Emma had been living in chronic hyperglycemia for months while I trusted David's explanations about insurance changes. I called Sarah from my cell phone, my voice barely controlled. Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late. I discovered something about Emma's care that terrifies me. Catherine, what's wrong? David has been stealing Emma's medical reimbursements for 18 months. She should have had continuous monitoring, premium insulin, everything. Instead, he's been giving her generic supplies and pocketing the difference. Her declining health isn't natural. It's systematic medical neglect. The silence stretched forever. Catherine, what you're describing is criminal child endangerment. Emma's life has been at risk. You need to document everything and contact both law enforcement and Child Protective Services immediately. But I'm her mother. I should have seen this. I'm a pediatric ICU nurse. Stop. Medical financial abusers specifically target the knowledge gap between clinical care and insurance administration. David exploited your professional focus on Emma's immediate needs to hide systematic abuse. This is not your fault. Using the address from David's personal expenses statements, I drove to an apartment complex 20 minutes from our home. In the parking lot sat David's car. Through a second-floor window, I could see him with a woman I didn't recognize, sitting at a dinner table in a fully furnished apartment. David wasn't just stealing Emma's medical money. He'd been building an entire second life with it while our daughter's health deteriorated from medical neglect. I sat in my car, watching the man I'd trusted with Emma's life enjoying dinner paid for with money that should have ensured our daughter's medical security. The betrayal was complete: financial, medical, and personal. I spent the next hour in my car using my nursing training to document the evidence systematically. Insurance fraud, $15,246 in reimbursements for premium care. Emma never received medical neglect. 18 months of substandard care causing declining health. Fund diversion, $14,400 transferred from Emma's medical account to personal expenses, child endangerment. Systematic denial of medically necessary supplies to a vulnerable child. The personal expenses revealed the truth. Rent for a second apartment, utilities, groceries, restaurant charges, gifts. David had been using Emma's medical fund to support his secret relationship. Systematic medical neglect through financial control is particularly insidious because the victim blames themselves for the patient's decline. The abuser exploits medical complexity to hide life-threatening cost-cutting while positioning themselves as the responsible financial manager dealing with difficult insurance requirements. My professional competence made me trust David's insurance expertise completely. This trust allowed him to systematically endanger Emma's health, while I attributed her declining condition to natural disease progression rather than calculated medical abuse. This level of betrayal, systematically endangering a child's medical care while funding a secret life, is unforgivable. Medical financial abuse that puts children's lives at risk represents the intersection of financial crime and child abuse. Boundaries. Community, how do you protect medical funds from this systematic theft? Back home, I spread all the evidence across my bed: insurance fraud documentation, medical supply receipts showing the quality difference, Emma's declining health data, and bank records proving systematic fund diversion. Emma's glucose meter data told the story visually. 18 months of progressive deterioration corresponding exactly with David's systematic reduction of care quality. Her health problems weren't mysterious. They were the predictable result of medical financial abuse. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Working late again, meeting running over, don't wait up. For the first time in 18 months, I knew exactly where David was and what he was really doing. He wasn't at a work meeting. He was at his secret apartment, funded by Emma's medical money while our daughter suffered the consequences of his financial priorities. I looked at recent photos of Emma compared to pictures from 18 months ago. The decline was visible once I knew what to look for: subtle weight loss, decreased energy, frequent minor illnesses I'd attributed to normal childhood development. Emma had been slowly deteriorating while David systematically stole the resources meant to keep her healthy. Every glucose tablet he told her to save, every generic supply substitution, every declined premium option had been calculated to generate money for his personal use. But my nursing training had taught me something crucial about crisis management. Emotion follows action, not the other way around. Right now, Emma needed protection, not revenge. I had discovered the full scope of David's betrayal: 18 months of systematic medical fraud that endangered Emma's life while funding a secret relationship. The man I'd trusted with my daughter's medical security had been slowly killing her to pay for his affair. But my ICU training had prepared me for this moment. I knew how to prioritize patient safety over personal trauma. The next 8 minutes would show my systematic response to protect Emma's immediate medical needs while building the legal case that would ensure David faced full accountability for endangering our daughter's life. When a pediatric ICU nurse discovers systematic child medical abuse, the response isn't emotional, it's surgical. My professional training had taught me that in medical emergencies, protocol saves lives while emotion clouds judgment. David was about to learn that he hadn't just betrayed a wife, he'd endangered the child of someone whose career was built on protecting vulnerable patients. I sat waiting with 18 months of documented evidence spread in organized piles: insurance statements, bank records, medical receipts, and Emma's declining health data. I'd been awake all night, but my mind was crystal clear. David walked in expecting his normal routine. Instead, he found me holding a bank statement from his secret account. "Good morning, David. We need to discuss Emma's medical expenses." His expression shifted, the freeze of someone caught but calculating their defense. "Catherine, what are you doing with my personal banking information?" "Personal banking? This account contains $12,847 in medical reimbursements meant for Emma's diabetes care. Money insurance paid for continuous monitoring she never received, premium insulin she never got." David set his coffee down slowly. "You're misunderstanding what you're looking at. Medical reimbursements are complex. I've been managing Emma's expenses efficiently." I interrupted by placing Emma's glucose chart on the table. "David, I'm a pediatric ICU nurse. Emma's A1C increased from 2% to 8. 1% over 6 months. Her growth velocity declined. She's showing chronic hyperglycemia symptoms. This isn't efficient management. This is systematic medical neglect." David shifted to calculated manipulation. Catherine, you're letting professional paranoia affect your judgment as a mother. Emma is fine. Kids go through adjustment periods. Stop. My voice carried 12 years of pediatric crisis authority. I called Meridian Health Plus directly. Continuous monitoring is fully covered for pediatric diabetics. Premium insulin requires prior authorization you never requested. Emma should have access to everything that could have prevented her declining health. I slid the secret apartment bank statements across the table. You saved yourself $14,400 to fund your second apartment while our daughter's health deteriorated. The silence stretched. David's expression cycled through denial, calculation, and finally, justification. Catherine, you don't understand the pressures I've been under. Emma's diagnosis turned our life upside down. You became obsessed with her medical needs. I felt like I didn't have a wife anymore. I stared at him with the cold assessment I used for neglectful parents. So, you decided to endanger our daughter's life to fund a relationship with someone else. I didn't endanger anyone. Emma has been fine with the supplies I provided. You're creating medical drama where none exists. I opened Emma's file and read with clinical precision. March 2023. Emma's average glucose was 145 mg/dl. June, 165. September, 178. December, 189. Current, 195 mg/dl. These numbers represent progressive medical deterioration over 18 months. Numbers can be interpreted many ways. No. These numbers represent chronic hyperglycemia in a 7-year-old child, increased risk of diabetic ketoacidosis, organ damage, potentially life-threatening emergencies, while you played house with another woman using Emma's medical money. David's manipulation escalated. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You see catastrophe in normal fluctuations. You've become obsessive, unable to see that Emma is a normal, healthy kid who doesn't need every expensive device available. I stood and retrieved clinical literature. Continuous glucose monitoring for pediatric type 1 diabetics reduces emergency visits by 67%. Premium insulin provides consistent control generic can't match. Emergency supplies you told Emma to save prevent brain damage from hypoglycemia. David interrupted. Those are guidelines, not requirements. You made medical decisions without medical knowledge, prioritizing financial access over Emma's health outcomes. Our conversation was interrupted by Emma walking into the kitchen, pale and tired. Mom, my tummy feels yucky again, and I'm really thirsty. I immediately checked her glucose. 267, right, DL, dangerously high. As I prepared insulin to bring it down, David watched with apparent normalcy, as if this medical crisis was acceptable. David, do you see this? Emma's glucose is 267. Normal is 90/110. Emma's operating at nearly 3 times normal because the insulin you chose doesn't provide adequate control. Emma looked between us, confused. Daddy, why is Mom upset about my numbers? You said they were okay. David's response chilled me. Your mom worries too much about your diabetes, Emma. Your numbers are fine. Some kids just run higher. I stared at David in horror. You told our 7-year-old that dangerously high glucose levels are normal. You've been gaslighting a child about her medical condition to cover your financial abuse. After Emma returned to her room, I faced David with full knowledge of his betrayal. For 18 months, you've systematically endangered our daughter's life. You've stolen $15,146 in medical reimbursements. You've declined medically necessary care. You've gaslighted both Emma and me about her medical needs. David's final defense was pure narcissistic justification. Emma has been fine. She's a normal, active kid who doesn't need every expensive medical device available. You're the one with the problem. You can't accept that diabetes is manageable without spending thousands on unnecessary equipment. David, continuous monitoring isn't unnecessary for a 7-year-old who can't recognize hypoglycemic episodes. Premium insulin isn't unnecessary when glucose control is failing. Emergency supplies aren't unnecessary for a type 1 diabetic child. I presented the insurance correspondence showing his systematic pattern. You've been declining pre-authorized medical equipment for 18 months. Insurance approved continuous monitoring in March 2023. You declined it and kept the money. Every no was a choice to endanger Emma for your financial benefit. David's justifications became desperate. Our marriage was falling apart. Emma's diagnosis consumed your existence. I needed support, companionship. So you funded that companionship by stealing from our daughter's medical care. I didn't steal. I managed expenses responsibly and used savings for legitimate personal needs. My response was clinical and devastating. David, you don't get to call child medical neglect responsible financial management. You systematically degraded a vulnerable child's medical care to fund an extramarital relationship. That's not management. That's child endangerment through medical abuse. Medical financial abusers often justify child endangerment by claiming the parent is overprotective while systematically compromising care quality. This gaslighting makes parents question medical necessity while children's health deteriorates. When abusers gaslight children directly about their medical reality, it represents psychological abuse compounding medical neglect. David's willingness to tell Emma that dangerous glucose levels are normal revealed the depths of psychological manipulation, endangering both physical health and distorting medical reality to protect financial access. This manipulation, telling parents they're overprotective while systematically endangering children's medical care, is unforgivable. Medical financial abusers exploit parental love to hide systematic child endangerment. Boundaries, community, recognize these justification patterns that put children's lives at risk. My final statement carried professional certainty and maternal protection. You endangered our daughter's life to fund your affair. That's not financial management. That's child abuse. David's response revealed his complete disconnect from reality. You're overreacting to normal medical expense management. Emma has been perfectly healthy. I looked at the man I'd trusted with Emma's life, watching him justify 18 months of systematic medical endangerment with the casual dismissal of someone who viewed our daughter's health as optional expense rather than essential protection. My ICU training kicked in completely. This wasn't a marriage problem anymore. This was a patient safety emergency requiring immediate intervention and systematic protection protocols. David's systematic medical abuse had been fully exposed, along with his psychological manipulation that ran deeper than financial crime. He'd been gaslighting both Emma and me about medical reality to protect his access to her medical funds while building a secret life with her healthcare money. The next 8 minutes would show my systematic response to protect Emma immediately while building the legal framework, ensuring David faced complete accountability for endangering a child's life for personal financial gain. My professional training was about to collide with maternal protection in ways David never anticipated. When you discover systematic child medical abuse, your response follows crisis protocols. Stabilize the patient, secure resources, document everything, remove the threat. My professional training was about to collide with maternal instincts, creating a protection response that would ensure Emma's medical security and David's complete accountability. I moved with ICU efficiency, spreading Emma's medical documentation across my bed and beginning systematic calls with clinical precision. First, Dr. Anderson, Emma's endocrinologist. Dr. Anderson, I need an emergency appointment for Emma today. I've discovered my husband has been systematically providing substandard diabetes care while pocketing insurance reimbursements for premium supplies. Catherine, what exactly are you telling me? Emma should have had continuous monitoring for 18 months. Instead, she's used basic strips. Her insulin has been generic rather than premium formulation insurance approved. Her A1C increased from 2% to 8%, 1% due to systematic medical neglect disguised as insurance limitations. Dr. Anderson's pause was significant. If accurate, Emma's life has been endangered by medical neglect. Bring her at 10 a.m. I need to assess immediately and document the medical impact. Dr. Anderson examined Emma while I provided the timeline of David's systematic abuse. Emma sat unaware that her declining health wasn't natural progression but calculated neglect. Emma, how have you been feeling over the past months? Tired a lot. My tummy hurts sometimes. I get thirsty even after drinking water. Dr. Anderson looked at me with professional concern. Classic chronic hyperglycemia symptoms that proper management should prevent. Mrs. Wells, Emma's symptoms are consistent with prolonged inadequate glucose control. Her weight dropped 2 percentiles, suggesting diabetes management hasn't met her metabolic needs. I documented with nursing precision. Doctor, What would have been different with the continuous monitoring and premium insulin insurance approved? Continuous monitoring would have caught glucose excursions before symptoms. Premium insulin would have provided consistent control. Emma would have maintained better growth and avoided chronic hyperglycemia complications. Dr. Anderson's assessment was medically damning. Emma has suffered 18 months of preventable complications due to systematically inadequate diabetes management below standard medical practice. Using my employee privileges, I obtained Emma's proper supplies immediately. The contrast was stark. Premium insulin costing $340 monthly versus $89 generic David provided. Continuous monitoring supplies at $267 monthly versus basic strips at $45. Monthly difference, $573. Over 18 months, $10,314 in care quality David sacrificed for personal financial access. But investigating deeper, I discovered something worse. Insurance reimbursements totaled $847 monthly, $274 more than even premium supplies cost. David wasn't just providing substandard care to save money, he was profiting from the difference while Emma's health declined. I met with Detective Morrison while Emma stayed with my sister. The detective reviewed documented evidence with professional precision. Mrs. Wells, this constitutes systematic medical child abuse combined with insurance fraud. Medical records show clear deterioration corresponding to substandard care timeline. I provided the complete file: insurance statements, bank records, medical documentation, Dr. Anderson's assessment of preventable complications. Detective, my daughter's life has been endangered for 18 months while my husband profited from declining her care. What are the legal implications? Multiple charges: insurance fraud, child endangerment through medical neglect, financial abuse. His insurance industry background makes this particularly serious. He had professional knowledge of medical necessity he was denying. Detective Morrison explained protection process. We'll freeze accounts containing medical funds. Remove his medical authority immediately. Initiate criminal charges for both financial fraud and child endangerment. I sat with Emma setting up her new continuous glucose monitor, the device she should have had for over a year. Mom, why am I getting the beeping thing back now? I chose words carefully. Sometimes insurance takes time to approve the best equipment. Now they've approved it. Will this help me feel less tired? Yes, sweetheart. This will keep your sugar levels healthy so you feel better. Emma's innocent acceptance broke my heart. For 18 months, she'd accepted feeling sick because adults told her it was normal. David's gaslighting convinced Emma that chronic illness symptoms were acceptable rather than preventable. As I calibrated the monitor, I explained, "This will beep if your sugar gets too low or high, so we can fix it immediately." Like a safety alarm? Exactly. It will help keep you safe. The irony wasn't lost. Emma needed safety alarms because the person who should have protected her medical interests was systematically endangering them. I documented final protection with nursing precision. Medical power of attorney transferred exclusively to me. Insurance communications redirected to my contact information bank accounts, containing medical funds frozen pending investigation. Emma's care restored to insurance-approved premium standards. Legal proceedings initiated for financial fraud and child endangerment. David returned to find me waiting with systematic documentation complete. Catherine, I know you've been making calls about Emma's care. You're overreacting to normal medical management. My response was calm and final. David, I've revoked your medical power of attorney. Detective Morrison froze the account containing Emma's reimbursements. Dr. Anderson documented 18 months of preventable complications due to systematic care degradation. David's facade dropped completely. You can't take away my authority over my daughter's medical decisions. I can and have. You've demonstrated that financial interests override Emma's medical needs. You're no longer authorized for any decisions regarding her diabetes management. David's desperation revealed true priorities. You're destroying our family over insurance technicalities. Emma has been fine with care I provided. Emma has not been fine. She's been chronically ill due to systematically inadequate care while you profited from insurance reimbursements meant for premium supplies. Her health deteriorated while you funded an extramarital relationship. Protecting children from medical financial abuse requires immediate intervention and systematic safeguards. The child's medical security must be restored before addressing financial crimes, but both require professional legal intervention to prevent ongoing endangerment. My systematic approach, medical assessment, legal consultation, evidence documentation, provided foundation for both Emma's immediate protection and David's complete accountability. Emergency medical protection is parental duty when systematic abuse is discovered. Medical financial abuse endangering children requires immediate intervention and permanent safeguards. Share boundaries strategies for protecting children's medical resources from financial predators. David's final manipulation attempt failed completely. When Emma's medical expenses bankrupt us because you insisted on every expensive option, you'll understand what I was preventing. My response was professionally devastating. David, insurance was covering everything Emma needed. Your management only prevented Emma receiving appropriate care. You weren't protecting finances. You were stealing from our daughter's medical security to fund your personal life. Emma now had continuous monitoring, premium insulin, and medical resources she should have had for 18 months. David lost all medical authority and faced criminal charges for both insurance fraud and child endangerment. My professional training had taught me that patient safety always comes first. Emma's medical security was now protected by transparent systems, professional oversight, and legal safeguards, ensuring her care could never again be compromised for someone else's financial gain. I had systematically restored Emma's medical security while building legal framework for David's accountability. Emma now had the monitoring, insulin, and resources she deserved. David faced complete loss of medical authority and criminal prosecution for endangering our daughter's life. The next 8 minutes would show comprehensive consequences David faced for systematic child endangerment, and the permanent safeguards I implemented ensuring Emma's medical security could never again be compromised for someone else's financial benefit. True accountability for medical child endangerment isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring vulnerable patients' security and preventing future harm. David was about to discover that endangering a child's life for personal gain carries consequences across every domain: professional, legal, financial, and personal. David sat across from HR Director Margaret Chen and Compliance Officer Robert Torres. The investigation had revealed professional ethics violations extending beyond his family situation. Mr. Wells, our investigation shows you used professional insurance knowledge to systematically defraud medical coverage for your own daughter, Director Chen stated. You violated federal healthcare fraud statutes by declining pre-authorized treatments while retaining reimbursements intended for those specific treatments, Officer Torres added. David attempted familiar deflection. This is a personal family matter involving reasonable expense management. My professional performance has been exemplary. Director Chen opened his termination file. Mr. Wells, you used insider knowledge to commit medical fraud against your own child. This represents criminal activity and professional ethics violations, making you unemployable in the insurance industry. The termination was comprehensive. Immediate dismissal for cause, benefit forfeiture, professional reference restrictions, and industry licensing board notification. David's insurance career was over permanently. The judge reviewed comprehensive evidence I'd compiled with Detective Morrison. Medical documentation told a clear story of systematic child endangerment. Mr. Wells, evidence shows you systematically declined medically necessary treatments for your diabetic daughter while retaining insurance reimbursements. Dr. Anderson's assessment confirms Emma suffered preventable health complications due to your actions. David's attorney minimized. Your Honor, Mr. Wells made reasonable financial decisions. The child was never in immediate danger. Judge Rodriguez responded decisively. Counselor, systematic medical neglect causing documented health deterioration in a chronically ill child constitutes child endangerment. Mr. Wells used professional knowledge to deny medically necessary care for personal financial gain. The court order was comprehensive. Immediate and permanent removal of medical decision-making authority, mandatory restitution of $15,246 in diverted medical funds, court-supervised medical expense, auditing for any future contact, professional prohibition from healthcare-related employment. Emma's follow-up revealed dramatic improvement with restored care. Her health transformation over just 2 weeks was remarkable. Emma's glucose control improved significantly, Dr. Anderson told me. Average levels dropped from 195 mAh/dL to 142 mAh/dL with proper supplies. Her energy returned, growth velocity normalizing. Emma beamed. "Dr. Anderson, I can see my numbers on the screen and it beeps when I need to check. I don't feel yucky anymore." I documented medical recovery for legal proceedings. "Doctor, what would have been long-term consequences if Emma continued receiving substandard care?" Chronic hyperglycemia in pediatric patients increases risk of kidney damage, vision problems, cardiovascular issues. Emma was developing early signs that have now stabilized with proper care. The medical evidence was clear. David's systematic neglect was actively damaging Emma's long-term health prospects while causing immediate suffering. I met with the ethics committee to discuss implementing protocols for detecting medical financial abuse. "Catherine, your experience represents a gap in our system," ethics chair Dr. Williams explained. "Medical professionals assume family members managing finances act in patients' best interests. My experience led to systematic improvements. We need protocols recognizing when care quality declines due to insurance changes reported by family members. Red flags include generic substitutions, worsening condition control, and progressive health deterioration attributed to coverage limitations." The hospital implemented new safeguards: direct insurance verification for pediatric chronic conditions, medical social worker consultation for families reporting coverage denials, systematic monitoring of care quality versus insurance authorization patterns, professional intervention protocols. When medical neglect through financial control is suspected, David returned to his secret apartment to find Rebecca packing. The financial support maintaining their relationship disappeared with his terminated employment and frozen accounts. "David, I can't continue this relationship knowing it was funded by stealing from your daughter's medical care," Rebecca said without looking at him. "What you did to Emma is unforgivable." "Rebecca, you don't understand the pressure I was under. Catherine became obsessed with Emma's medical needs. So you decided to abandon your daughter's medical needs instead. You endangered a 7-year-old child to pay for our relationship. That's child abuse." Rebecca's departure completed David's isolation. The relationship he prioritized over Emma's medical security ended when his funding of it was exposed as systematic child endangerment. I reviewed the comprehensive accountability David faced. Criminal charges, federal healthcare fraud, child endangerment through medical neglect, 3 of 5 years federal prison, professional consequences, employment termination, industry blacklisting, license revocation, financial accountability, full restitution, legal fees, court-supervised expense monitoring, personal consequences, complete loss of medical authority, supervised visitation, relationship collapse, civil liability, potential malpractice suit for systematic medical neglect. The accountability was comprehensive and permanent. David would face consequences for endangering Emma's life throughout his career and parental relationship. I tucked Emma into bed, checking her continuous glucose monitor. The device showed stable readings, consistent control, preventing both immediate symptoms and long-term complications. "Mom, why does Daddy look so sad when he visits?" I chose words carefully. Sometimes adults make choices that have consequences they didn't expect. Daddy is learning that choices affect other people in ways that can't be undone. Like when I don't take care of my diabetes and feel sick? Similar but more serious. Daddy's choices affected your health, so now other people help ensure you stay safe. Emma processed this with childhood logic. "So now you and Dr. Anderson make sure I get the right medicine?" "Exactly. People who understand how to keep you healthy make decisions about your medical care." Emma snuggled with her pillow, the continuous glucose monitor humming quietly. "I like the beeping thing. It helps me know when my sugar is okay. That's exactly what it's supposed to do, help keep you safe." Accountability for medical child endangerment must be comprehensive and permanent. The child's future medical security requires both legal protection and systemic safeguards. When medical professionals abuse knowledge to endanger children, consequences must extend across professional, legal, and personal domains to prevent future harm. My systematic approach ensured David's consequences matched his systematic abuse: professional accountability for knowledge abuse, legal consequences for criminal endangerment, and personal isolation resulting from relationships built on child exploitation. This is what real accountability looks like: Comprehensive consequences matching systematic abuse. Child medical endangerment requires professional, legal, and personal accountability to protect both specific victims and prevent future abuse. Boundaries. Community. Justice doesn't require revenge when consequences are systematic and complete. I reviewed Emma's glucose data from the past month. The improvement was dramatic. Normalized levels, fewer symptoms, better sleep, improved growth, restored energy. The medical evidence was irrefutable. Emma's health problems weren't natural disease progression. They were preventable complications of systematic medical neglect. My professional training helped me understand what David's abuse could have caused: kidney damage, vision problems, growth delays, cognitive impacts, potential diabetic emergencies. But Emma's rapid improvement proved crucial. The damage wasn't permanent. Early intervention prevented long-term complications. My discovery and systematic response saved Emma from potentially irreversible health consequences. David faced comprehensive accountability for endangering Emma's life: criminal charges, professional termination, financial restitution, complete loss of medical authority, and personal isolation. The consequences matched the systematic nature of his abuse: comprehensive, permanent, and designed to protect both Emma specifically and vulnerable children generally. The final 8 minutes would show Emma's complete medical recovery, my transformation from trusting partner to protective advocate, and systematic safeguards ensuring no one could ever again compromise Emma's medical security for personal gain. 6 months after discovering David's systematic medical abuse, I had transformed from trusting wife to protective advocate. Emma's health was completely restored, David faced permanent consequences, and my experience became a shield protecting other vulnerable families from similar endangerment. This is how medical financial abuse ends, not with revenge, but with systematic protection. Emma sat confidently on the examination table while Dr. Anderson reviewed her latest results. The transformation was remarkable, both medically and emotionally. "Emma, your A1C is 7.0%, perfect for someone your age," Dr. Anderson announced. "Your growth is normal, glucose control excellent, and there's no lasting damage from the period of inadequate care." Emma beamed. "My glucose monitor helps me know when everything's okay. I don't feel tired or sick anymore." I documented the recovery with professional satisfaction. Emma's decline under David's management had been completely reversed with proper diabetes care. "Doctor, what's Emma's long-term outlook?" With consistent quality care, Emma can expect normal development and life expectancy. The 18 months of substandard care caused no permanent complications. I addressed pediatric medical staff about recognizing medical financial abuse. My case had become training standard for healthcare professionals. Medical financial abuse often masquerades as insurance limitations, I explained. When pediatric patients show declining health attributed to coverage changes, verify insurance communications directly. Don't assume family financial managers understand medical necessity. Dr. Chen added perspective. "Catherine's experience taught us that medical professionals can be vulnerable because we trust other professionals' expertise in specialized areas. The hospital implemented new protocols: direct insurance verification for chronic pediatric conditions, medical social worker consultation for families reporting coverage denials, and systematic monitoring when care quality doesn't match insurance authorizations. I facilitated a monthly support group for families managing chronic conditions. The room filled with parents learning protection strategies from my experience. Medical financial transparency isn't about distrust. It's about verification," I began. "When someone's life depends on medical resources, multiple people should understand how those resources are managed." Maria shared her story. "My husband declined my daughter's seizure medication, claiming insurance wouldn't cover it. When I called directly, it was fully covered. He'd been keeping the money for gambling." I responded, "This pattern repeats nationwide. Medical complexity provides perfect cover for financial abuse. Independent verification of all insurance communications is essential." The group developed practical safeguards: direct insurance contact, medical advocacy resources, and warning sign recognition protecting vulnerable patients from financial exploitation. Judge Rodriguez reviewed David's permanent restrictions. The safeguards were comprehensive and unchangeable. "Mr. Wells, your visitation with Emma remains supervised indefinitely. You systematically endangered a child's life for personal financial gain. The court cannot risk any future medical decision-making authority. David's final appeal failed. Your Honor, I've completed court-ordered counseling. Judge Rodriguez responded firmly. Mr. Wells, child endangerment through medical neglect requires permanent protection. Emma's safety supersedes your parental convenience. The restrictions were final. Supervised visitation only, no medical authority, no insurance access, and prohibition from healthcare-related employment. Emma and I shared breakfast with easy confidence. Emma's diabetes management had become routine excellence, checking her continuous glucose monitor, calculating insulin doses, managing her condition with competent independence. Mom, my friend Sarah's worried because her grandma just got diabetes. Can I help explain it? Of course. What would you tell her? That diabetes is totally manageable when you have proper supplies and people who understand medical needs, and it's important to make sure you get medicine that works best, not just the cheapest option. I smiled at Emma's sophisticated medical advocacy. Excellent advice. And if something feels wrong about medical care, ask questions until you get answers that make sense. Adults should prioritize health over money. Emma's wisdom reflected hard-earned understanding that medical advocacy is everyone's responsibility. I reviewed Emma's complete medical file, 18 months of progressive decline under David's systematic neglect, followed by complete recovery with proper care. The visual evidence proved Emma's health problems weren't natural disease progression. They were preventable complications of financial abuse. My phone contained messages from families nationwide implementing boundary protection strategies after learning about Emma's case. Medical financial abuse, once hidden by complexity and trust, now faced systematic detection and prevention. The strongest protection comes not from trust alone, but from verification, transparency, and community awareness that medical necessity must always override financial convenience. Emma headed to school with her diabetes supplies organized, continuous glucose monitor functioning perfectly, health completely restored. She carried confidence that comes from understanding her medical needs would always be met with appropriate resources. I watched from the doorway, knowing Emma's medical security was protected by transparent systems, professional oversight, and community awareness that would never again allow financial manipulation to endanger a child's life. The kitchen, once haunted by hidden medical abuse, now represented verified medical management and assured healthcare quality. Emma's diabetes was managed with premium supplies and systematic safeguards ensuring her security could never be compromised for someone else's financial benefit. Medical financial abuse that endangers children requires community vigilance and professional intervention. The strongest medical families maintain transparent financial boundaries and systematic verification protecting vulnerable patients from exploitation. My experience proves that systematic medical abuse can be overcome with systematic protection. When medical professionals recognize financial manipulation as child endangerment requiring immediate intervention, vulnerable patients receive the protection they deserve. A child's medical security must never depend on a single person's financial honesty. Join our Boundaries community for medical family protection strategies. When someone's life depends on medical resources, multiple safeguards ensure appropriate use. Subscribe for boundary education that protects what matters most, ensuring medical necessity always trumps financial convenience. I discovered that medical financial abuse hides behind insurance complexity and misplaced trust. But I also discovered that systematic protection, transparent management, direct verification, professional oversight, and community awareness creates unbreachable security for vulnerable patients. Emma's complete recovery proves that children can overcome medical financial abuse when intervention is swift, comprehensive, and professionally supported. The strongest families have the clearest boundaries and the courage to enforce them when a child's life depends on it. This is what boundary protection creates. Children who thrive because adults prioritize medical needs over personal financial interests. Medical financial transparency protects the most vulnerable patients from those who would exploit their medical dependencies for personal gain. Today, Emma is a healthy, confident child whose diabetes is managed with the best available care. I am a medical advocate whose experience protects vulnerable families nationwide. And David's attempt to prioritize personal financial access over child medical security resulted in permanent accountability that protects both Emma specifically and vulnerable children generally. Medical financial abuse thrives in complexity and secrecy, but with clear boundaries, systematic monitoring, and community awareness, families can protect both their resources and their most vulnerable members. The strongest families are those with the clearest boundaries and the courage to enforce them when a child's life depends on it.